नमस्कार, सुस्वागतम, केम छो, आदाबार्स, गुड आफ्टरनून। आप सभी का पीआरएल के अमृत व्याख्यान में स्वागत है, अभिनंदन है। A very warm welcome from me, Anil Bharadwaj, for PRL का अमृत व्याख्यान। Today is the 49th व्याख्यान of the series of व्याख्यान्स which we are organizing as a part of PRL's 75 years of legacy and history in fundamental physics and space sciences. Established in the year 1947 by the father of Indian space program, Dr. Vikram Sarabhai, the PRL's Platinum Jubilee coincides with India's 75 years of independence. Hence, it's a joint celebration of the development of science and technology in India by PRL under the banner of PRL Amrut Vyakhyaan. We have a very distinguished speaker today, the Vyakhyaan Karta, Dr. Raman R. Gangakhedkar, who is a well-known personality, and many of you must have seen him on TV shows, particularly related to COVID. And his topic today is also titled COVID-19 in India, Opportunities and Challenges. He is Dr. C.G. Pandit, National Chair of Indian Council of Medical Research. We really thank Dr. Raman for agreeing to give the Vyakhyaan in our Platinum Jubilee celebrations and to be with us today. I would now request Dr. Durga Prasad to kindly introduce our Vyakhyaan Karta to our WebEx panel, as well as those who have joined us live on the PRL YouTube. Over to you, Dr. Durga.
Thank you very much, sir. It is my immense pleasure to introduce our today's Vyakhyaan Karta, Dr. Raman R. Gangakhedkar. Thank you very much, sir, for agreeing to deliver the Vyakhyaan in spite of your busy schedule. So many of you might be knowing about him, but it's my formal duty to introduce him. Dr. Gangakhedkar is an Indian public health expert and epidemiologist. He was the former head Division of Epidemiology and Communicable Diseases, ECD, Indian Council of Medical Research, ICMR, New Delhi. And he also served as Director in Charge, National AIDS Research Institute, Pune. He is currently serving as Dr. C.G. Pandit, National Chair, ICMR. For last 3 decades, he has been working in the field of HIV disease. He is an expert in HIV medicine and associated infectious disease, epidemiology and public health. He was one of the key players in advocacy since 1989 and has been involved in policy making at national level on antiretroviral therapy, management of opportunistic infections, prevention of mother-to-child transmission, and STI management, in addition to other key population-specific policies. He is very much popular and astute HIV medicine physician. He has been a member of many prestigious international committees on different facets of HIV disease, including those constituted by ACTG, WHO, UNICEF, UNFPA, and UNAIDS. His efforts to empower the socially challenged populations and enhancing their treatment literacy are widely appreciated. As head of ECD ICMR, he managed research and contributed to public health response in recent outbreaks of Nipah, Zika, and COVID-19. As you might have seen several times on television, Dr. Raman Gangakhedkar had become the face of ICMR during government briefings to media on the coronavirus pandemic. He is a member of the National Task Force on COVID-19 and also a member of Clinical Research Group and Epidemiology and Operational Research Group on COVID-19. He is a member of WHO Scientific Advisory Group for the Origins of Novel Pathogens, SAGO. He is a member of India Lancet Commission on COVID-19. He is a member of Scientific Advisory Board of ICMR, a member of Technical Research Group on Surveillance of Viral Hepatitis constituted by National Center for Disease Control. He is also an expert to the Standing National Committee on Essential List of Medicines and also has been a member empowered Group 2 on COVID-19. In addition, there is a big list He is a member of several committees at national and international level. He has published over 220 papers in reputed national and international journals. So he has been honored with prestigious Padma Shri Award in 2020. He was awarded Doctor of Medicine Honours Causa by Datta Mega Institute of Medical Sciences. He has a large list of awards, some of which include Dr. Shankar Rao Chavan Jeevan Gaurav Puraskar 2022, Lifetime Achieve Award, AIDS Society of India 2022, Swami Ramananda Tirtha Marathwada Gaurav Puraskar 2021, Lifetime Achieve Award by the Army Institute of Technology, Pune on 2021, and Karma Yogini Vijayate Lavate Award by Manavya on February 11, 2021, and the list goes on. So, thank you very much, sir, for accepting our invitation, and I request you to deliver today's Vyakhyaan. Over to you, sir.
Yeah. Thank you. Am I audible?
Yes, sir, you are audible.
Yeah. So let me first thank the director of the institute and all the organizers of this lecture series for providing me an opportunity to talk on how we fought COVID and what is the future of COVID in a short period of time. Just 1 second, let me. Now, when we think in terms of COVID, the first thing today you realize that India continues to be second in terms of total number of cases that we had so far. You look at number of deaths that have occurred, we stand third in the global list as of now. When you look at these numbers, one tends to feel, oh, they are still higher. But the reality is, most of the people across the world, they thought that India would be worst affected in the beginning when the COVID started. Now we need to understand how did we fight and why do people now think that our management of COVID was perhaps good given the constraints that we had at that juncture. Now, if you remember, on December 30th in 2019, we didn't know what would happen, but a new paper was published, and that paper tended to talk about pneumonia that was seen in Wuhan, and we did not understand that that is going to have such a great impact over all of us in the near future. And there was an asymmetric warfare. It was almost like a guerrilla warfare that began in 2020. And why do we say it was a guerrilla warfare? It was mainly because the route of transmission of this infection was through droplet and airborne, which essentially means you will not be able to recognize who is going to transmit this infection to you. What was also important is largely most of these patients used to be asymptomatic. The result is you do not know for sure that whether this person could be infected, even if the person may have been very close to you all through. And what was also important was this was killing weak and old all through. So this guerrilla warfare began in January 2020, and the drivers for vulnerability that we had were immense, and we had a very high vulnerability mainly because the population density that we have in the country is high, mobility and migration is high, and then inter-country travels were also high. And the result is there was a big scare as to what would happen in the country. Now, if we are going to think about what has happened in the past, there is one thing which we have to realize. The way India moved towards containing this particular pandemic was an astounding success. Something which we had never seen. I have worked extensively in different disease national programs, but I have not seen the way there was a coordinated effort that went through in order to contain this. Let's look at the rapid response that we generated. On January 1st, 2020, we woke up to a new harsh reality that was going to bother us. January 11th, we had the first briefing by WHO India on the small outbreak that had occurred in Wuhan. And none of us thought it would grow as much within a short span of time. January 17th, there was first interdepartmental meeting of related secretaries, which was headed by Cabinet Secretary, and this continued every day for almost next 5 to 6 months' time. What followed was a comprehensive, enormous, well-coordinated, and a dynamic response. The first thing that people thought we should be doing was to create capacity for testing by RT-PCR, which was not there. WHO declared it as a public health emergency on January 30th, and simultaneously on the same day, we had the first confirmed case that had occurred in Kerala of a medical student who had come from Wuhan. And March 11th, WHO declared it as a pandemic. Now, at that juncture, if you realize, most of the countries where this was occurring at a time when we reported the first case, people were following zero COVID strategy. Now there, what is a zero COVID strategy? To have a stricter lockdown, do extensive testing, do massive contact tracing, isolate those who are infected, and you try to control your borders. Nobody is allowed to go in the country or outside as well. And this was very successful in Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and China. Naturally, everybody thought that perhaps the best way to handle this would be to prevent entry of this infection from other countries. Now, how do you do that? Now, one thing is you try to prevent the imported cases to come into India. And therefore, what was happening? Those places where these outbreaks were being reported, we tried to discourage travel into the country by making those visas invalid. Then all the Indian visas that were issued to the nationals of any country prior to March 13th, they were stopped at that juncture. India banned all the international flights when the first lockdown, the Janata lockdown was announced, and all domestic flights were also banned from March 24th, 2020, when the lockdown was implemented. This is not so easy a task as it appears. When the first bans were started for travel from countries where this infection was getting reported, what we were doing was we wanted to ensure that foreigners don't come to us. Then the biggest issue that tends to emerge is, can you stop the Indian citizens who were already in other countries from coming back to India? You cannot do that, because we have to realize that it is their right to come back to India. And perhaps that was one thing which taught us first lesson, that this is a guerrilla warfare. Whether the leaks, whether they are small or large, in no time they tend to become larger. Even if you are going to let only your citizens to come back, you cannot ensure for sure whether these people would not be infected by this virus. When the number of new infections started increasing in India, the strategy changed. It changed to minimize the spread through non-pharmacological interventions, because we knew infection has already reached India. Now we have to stop it from spreading to other parts of the country. Now, what were the bigger challenges that were arising? The first thing that we have to remember is health is a state subject. Now, what do we mean that it's on the concurrent list? But most of the times, the health is ruled by the state governments as such. So there are different policies that the states tend to adopt. You also have a private sector which dominates in provision of healthcare services over even the public sector as such. The third thing which was important was, if you want to contain the spread throughout the country, you have to have uniform policies. You cannot have health as a state subject per se. So one thing which was done was National Disaster Management Act of 2005 was evoked, and nationwide lockdown was ordered. And what was important was this was put under one authority of the Prime Minister, and every guideline was supposed to be followed by every state because of this particular NDMA act that was implemented at that juncture. Now, there are many people who tend to feel, is it that our lockdown was little late? No, is that true? Perhaps not. If you look at March 24th, we had only 562 reported cases so far from January 30th to March 24th, almost 2 months' time. And there were 9 deaths which were reported when the lockdown was started. But one must remember that we understood over a period of time that zero COVID transmission strategy really does not work, mainly because ours is a democratic country. It cannot have a military-like intervention which would be implemented in terms of lockdown. And the result was, by the time we thought of even lifting lockdowns, you found that the numbers had increased a lot. They went right up to 2 lakh total infections by then, and about 5,000 odd deaths that had occurred. But we started lockdown at the earliest. It is just that zero COVID transmission strategy was learned not to be working, though the earlier countries that were implementing had shown that it works in their own countries. What were the bigger challenges then? Why did we go for a lockdown? We have to remember that if we were to contain the spread in the country, what is most important? We had to isolate an infected individual and test the close contacts. And it requires, if we want to do this part, because you don't want to spread this infection, we need to know who is infected. And that was only possible by doing RT-PCR tests. You look at the huge subcontinent that we have, and you have a large population size. Now we had only one laboratory which was able to do RT-PCR then by the end of January, and it was National Institute of Virology under ICMR, which had validated the test, and they were in a position to deliver to other laboratories as to how this test can be performed. So the bigger challenge was to create the capacity for testing by RT-PCR across the country. Now, what was redeeming is our laboratories across in the country, they had large unutilized capacity and they rose to the occasion. When we actually wanted them to start this particular test in their own areas. Now, if you look at January 21st, the first RT-PCRs were standardized at ICMR NIV, and this was also not late globally. By then, when we standardized, there were only 314 cases that had occurred. So we moved very rapidly to try and standardize this particular test. On January 28th, we had conducted 22 tests and the frequency was 4 to 6 per day. Now you look at it, just imagine that this was the capacity at the country level. And then at that juncture, when the first case had occurred in India, the total number of global cases was close to about 8,000. But of them, only 82 were from 18 other countries other than China. So we started really well, really fast. If you actually think about it, we started quality assurance and quality control quickly. We created a spoke and hub kind of a model, and this was all implemented virtually. We started training all these labs, tried to impart, tried to do troubleshooting when they were testing, and by this we ensured we had close to about 600 million tests now that have been performed so far. Now, if you look at the number of labs that are conducting RT-PCR in the country today, you have almost 3,000 labs which can do it, of which 1,334 are from government labs, which is a big kind of capacity expansion that we did. And how could we do that? This was only possible because of lockdown. In lockdown, the people's movement was stopped. And essentially, when the movement stops, the infection could not travel as fast as it could have otherwise. And the result was, if during this period when we were trying to create capacity in the lab, by the time, if you look at May 31st, when we lifted the lockdown, we had close to about 669 labs which were established in all states before this lockdown was lifted. So it was essentially the immense work that was done by one of our units at ICMR headquarters. But then, even if you do that, there is one issue that tends to remain: is can we provide them the diagnostics? if you actually look at it, did we have the capacity prior to the COVID pandemic of producing RT-PCR kits or RNA extraction kits or viral transport medium or swabs? We didn't have that capacity. But all the industry that was related to this production of these diagnostics, they came up and the capacity was increased dramatically during the early 6 months period of after report of COVID. And this was extremely vital because the entire world was at that juncture trying to grapple with the shortages of RT-PCR kits, machine reagents, and majority of those developed countries, they had a huge money power and they were trying to buy the kits at whatever rates that were available at that juncture. These kits were only manufactured either in China or in South Korea, and then we had to fight with that. But instead, we chose another call of Atmanirbhar Bharat, the way our Prime Minister says, and we started moving in that direction. And we had a surplus of all these reagents by the time it was August, and we became exporters to the rest of the world at that juncture. Now, if you look at the challenge number 2 that we had, now you might have diagnostic reagents, but you need to ensure that healthcare workers are there to provide healthcare to people, also beds to isolate, and also intensive care beds. Now, when you want to ensure that healthcare workers provide care, you have to remember that they need to have N95 mask, they need to have personal protective equipment. But were they there? Perhaps not. Now let's look at what was the situation. If you look at N95 mask, you look at surgical mask, the numbers were so small, and the task and perhaps the fear of this pandemic and the numbers that we were envisaging was so huge that we had to invest this particular period of lockdown in producing these kinds of manufacturing capacity. And we should take pride as a country that within a short span of about 3 to 4 months time, the capacity was enhanced so much that we became second largest exporter across in the world for majority of these items which were otherwise not available in India. They were available in very small quantities and it could not have helped us in any way. Now you look at the strategy. Then the issue was, how do I ensure provision of healthcare? Now you must remember that we had limited COVID treatment facilities because they required dedicated isolation beds with oxygen. You look at number of ICU beds that we had, we were falling short dramatically. All this was created during this period of lockdown, and we had about 12,500 odd quarantine centers and close to about 6 lakh beds were also created. And we had to train the doctors because you may put up ventilators, but people can't use ventilators unless they are trained. So we used telemedicine to train and troubleshoot people. And at that juncture, there was one thing which was also felt that during lockdown, even those who had other chronic diseases, they remained at home. Now, how do you provide healthcare to them? Because we are not here only to provide care for COVID. You have to look at provision of care to others, and this was done through teleconsultation, e-Sanjeevani approach for non-COVID patients as well. And we wanted to ensure that the doctors, healthcare workers, or frontline workers, they should not feel demotivated because of the fear that this infection could perhaps attack them also. So insurance cover was also provided to healthcare workers and frontline workers to boost up their morale and after provision of all these tools that they were required at that time. It is extremely difficult to imagine what would have had happened otherwise. We utilize this time effectively to gear up and meet the challenge of pandemic. But whenever you have a lockdown, lockdown can have a positive health outcome. But when you have positive health outcome from a non-pharmacological intervention, you will find economic impact could be worse at that juncture. and naturally there was a fear that it could impact people. So COVID relief was also provided to the people. Financial relief was given to them. Food support was also provided free, and there was a call that was given by the government to not to cut salaries of people and not remove employees from the job during this COVID period to ensure that the adverse economic impact can be reduced to some extent. We had this lockdown. The lockdown delayed the onset of the first wave, and that has also helped us a lot in disease management because our numbers started rising far later compared to what we saw in Europe and for that matter even in US. And the result was people were conducting research at that juncture. So we understood what would be a better way of management, which continued over a period of time subsequently, like dexamethasone, tocilizumab, now budesonide inhaler. All these we could know in management, and therefore our death rates, if you actually look at it, our death rates continue to be lower. You compare it for first wave, you look at second wave, and Omicron, fortunately, didn't have so much of an issue. This was only because of delayed onset of this epidemic in India. Now, if you look at Indian milestones, uh, as I said earlier, January 30th, we confirmed the first case, and we could do cultures of this virus by March 13th. uh, And once we did the culture, we could actually develop a diagnostic test which was based on ELISA. And this diagnostic test, which was developed on May 10th, we transferred this technology to Cadila on May 10th itself because we wanted to ensure that indigenous diagnostic kits were required largely. We wanted to ensure that this part is taken care of well, and subsequently we shared that technology to many pharma companies as such. We shared the isolated virus with Bharat Biotech mainly because we wanted to ensure that at least an indigenous vaccine manufacturer starts moving towards vaccine development. And all of us know that Covishield, Covaxin, all of them received an approval on January 3rd for emergency use authorization, and vaccine rollout began on January 16th in India. Now, this is something which is unheard of, that within a year, India could do a similar kind of uh, milestones achievement as you compare it with the Western nations as well. For vaccine development, one needs to understand the process really well. The genomic sequences of SARS-CoV-2, they became available on January 13, 2020. And NIH started their efforts to develop vaccine based on mRNA platform within 2 days of getting those sequences per se. They also put in a lot of money, uh, and it was labeled as Operation WARP in USA. And they had new vaccine development platforms which were developed against HIV and Ebola, and most of them had failed in terms of its efficacy, but different vaccine platforms were already available there. But look at us. The choice for us in India was, we didn't have access to those newer technologies. We had to rely on older platforms, and that's why we used whole inactivated platform of Bharat Biotech to generate Covaxin. And you look at the other thing which we could do from ICMR was to try and collaborate for adenovirus-based vaccine with Oxford for trials to begin with us. And that's how Covishield, the Oxford group, was trying to look for a manufacturing base, and they were trying to look at Serum Institute as one of their candidates, which we worked together, and we tried to ensure that Covishield also becomes a new platform because adenovirus vector based vaccines were not available as a platform in India at that juncture. It took about a couple of months to 3 months for technology transfer, and that's how Covishield came into existence. By the end of December 2020, we all remember that there were many vaccines which had started receiving emergency use authorizations in the Western world. These vaccines were able to reduce disease severity and death well, and also reduce the incident infections to some extent. Now, it is also important. Look at the kind of a challenge that we had. You may have vaccines, but if you have to provide these vaccines to 135 crore people, we had never done this in the past, where everybody had to be provided with these kinds of vaccines. And look at the requirement of syringes and needles in India. It was so huge that we had to struggle and we had to motivate those industries to invest into capacities to develop these number of syringes and needles. And you realize that within a span of about 10 to 12 months, we were one of the largest manufacturers in the world, and to an extent that for Japanese people, we provided a low dead space syringe from India when they required for their own administration. So these are very dramatic things that happened through our own response that came against this pandemic per se. If you look at January 2021, the first wave had just declined. People started relaxing. People thought, oh, now perhaps COVID is gone. They were not expecting it to come back. You look at what was happening by then. You look at number of tests that were done, the mass queues that was seen around 2021 early first 2 months. But if you look at the people's mobility, by cell phone mobility as Google tends to measure, you find that only it had come down to only minus 16%, which means people had started roaming around a lot compared to what was the situation in the past during the lockdown process itself. And the result was something which we all saw, and perhaps we regret going into the second wave. What was happening behind the scene? The virus continued to mutate during this period. These viruses, they mutate due to pressures that they encounter. That's number one. Number two, these are RNA viruses which have error-prone enzymes during replication. So whenever they produce a progeny, the progeny is not genetically not exactly the same as their parents per se. And you have certain drugs that may put pressures for them for their own survival. It might be your own immune system that may react, whether due to vaccines that you have taken against an infection or natural infection that occurs and provides a protective immune response. Now, the virus for its own survival has to fight against both these pressures, pressure of the drug or the immune pressure that tends to come, and it makes attempts to change itself, mutate genetically, and try to produce a variant which perhaps would be able to evade these immune responses per se. However, we must remember that when these mutations tend to occur, because they have a error-prone system, then not every mutation is likely to create a new virus which would be fit enough to infect all of us. But the challenge of the drugs, the vaccines, what it will do for the virus. Virus will try to produce a new variant which will ensure that the existing immunity does not suppress either their entry or survival in the human body. And these kinds of mutants are called as escape mutants. They escape the immune system's response and try to infect people per se. Now, when escape mutants tend to come, we must remember there used to be a concept called as herd immunity. And what is a herd immunity? Classically we knew if there is a given small village where people don't go outside that particular village, but stay within that village, if out of 100 people, 70 of them get infection from any particular disease, you will find that the immune response will ensure that the organism that is trying to spread across will find it difficult to find somebody who is vulnerable just by the methods of probability. So herd immunity was a concept that most of us used to think at that juncture. But was it correct? No, when the mutation that 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 is caused within that particular virus, if it is an escape mutant, then in those cases, the levels of 70% or 80% that you may think of herd immunity perhaps wouldn't stand strong, mainly because you would have a new kind of a virus which escapes the immune system. So herd immunity's goals, the goalpost kept on changing over a period of time. Therefore, even if people got infected, the proportion may have had been still higher, but still we could not stop emergence of subsequent waves coming, mainly because of the mutations. Now, if you look at the evolution of these variants, initially, it was Wuhan virus. Then you started with beta, then it was alpha, then gamma, then delta. And there was a huge delta upsurge that occurred in the second wave of this pandemic in India, which actually damaged and caused so many deaths that occurred during that particular period. Now, if you actually look at the epidemic curve, then you find that the was so sharp, the delta wave was so sharp that it overwhelmed the entire health infrastructure, and then we had issues like shortage of oxygen, shortage of drugs, because we could not anticipate that the numbers could be so high within such a short period of time, because the virus was not only highly infectious but also had a higher virulence per se. But in November 24th, when the second wave stopped, most of us thought that there is nothing much to worry. But November 24th, there was a small report that came from South Africa that they have found a new variant in their own areas. And this variant had added 50 mutations to the original Wuhan virus and about 30 mutations to Delta virus in a short period of time. So everybody was surprised. And there were 37 mutations in spike protein. Spike protein is a protein which the virus attaches to the cell and enters inside. So if you want to stop the entry, you need to have the same conserved spike protein, which was not there in this particular virus. You found suddenly large number of mutations, so you could not stop this infection through our own immune system per se. And these rate of mutations that were observed in this particular virus, which was named subsequently as Omicron, was found to be 2 times faster than that we had seen for earlier variants like Alpha, Beta, Gamma, and Delta. Fortunately, this particular virus had lesser virulence. It spread 3 times faster than Delta variant, but the virus had lost its ability to create respiratory distress due to pneumonia. Most of it was milder symptoms. There were very low hospitalizations and deaths. So people thought that perhaps we don't need to worry as much about this particular infection. But now, we suddenly find we are into another new zone where a fourth wave is being seen globally. But what is important is during Omicron's time, we saw for the first time that there was a widening gap between number of infections that were occurring in a day and the deaths that were occurring. The reason was Omicron was a milder illness. It had lower hospitalizations and lower number of deaths that were occurring. So this gap was essentially seen. And at that time, we had in June 2021, we had conducted fourth national sero survey to find out what proportion of people were already infected by this particular virus. Now, what was it that we found? That close to about a third of our own people had they continued to remain vulnerable to this particular infection. But then people started thinking, if it is only a third, then perhaps the way it was spreading, it may not affect all of us as much, because most of the people had already acquired this infection elsewhere. Now, when Omicron started, people people started, initially they were scared, but when they knew that these were milder infections, people were unwilling to seek testing and care as well, because care was not important as they perceived, and testing would not mean much because their fear was the municipal corporation will stop them. they will be isolated for 2 weeks. And as it is, this is a milder infection. So they started avoiding testing. Some of them went for home-based testing. So essentially, nobody had a clue as to what proportion of people perhaps are infected now. But doing such a national sero survey was also something which we wanted to avoid, because essentially it would mean more than 90% of the people would always have these antibodies in their body, and therefore they would be perhaps protected by natural immunity and vaccination. There our coverage was over 85% among the most vulnerable people. Where are we today in India? Omicron wave came, Omicron infected people, and then subsequently, you found that today we are in a place where the numbers continue to be small. Now there is a small increase that has occurred. Between 12 to 15,000 new daily infections are being reported in India, but that's a very small increase that we see. But if you look at the history of development of this Omicron, when you try to look at when did this particular variant evolve between the sublineages, now we know that this virus has different different variants in their sublineages in Omicron itself. They are named as BA.1, BA.2, BA.3, BA.4, and BA.5 as of now. If you look at BA.1, no, it came up first. It was one of those progenies of Omicron, and in India we had BA.2 that was essentially infecting all of us. And if you actually look at it today, now we also have BA.4 and BA.5. Now, what does this essentially mean? That the virus is continuing to evolve. The virus still is retaining its potential to infect us. And these infections, fortunately for us, they do not increase hospitalization or severe COVID disease. There is no increase in death rate. But these viruses have a higher transmission efficiency compared to BA.2, which infected all of us in the third wave per se. It has 27% higher ability to transmit into to another individual, and that's something which we have to keep at the back of mind. Unfortunately, even today there is a new report of a BAE strain which is expected to be far more challenging. We don't know its first report today. Are we better protected? Perhaps so. We have, there is a large proportion among the vulnerable populations. They have received 2 dosages of vaccine. Majority of us have been infected by Omicron BA.2. If you are infected by a similar strain, it is unlikely that this particular strain will not protect us from getting this infection subsequently from another variant of the same lineage. But what is also important that we have to remember that all this protection can last for 6 to 9 months, because after that the immunity tends to wane. What is important for all of us to remember is, even if the hybrid immunity, as we call, natural infection and immunity that also comes from vaccine, even if we have this hybrid immunity together, it tends to protect us against all previous viruses in experiments that were done in laboratory. However, there is one thing which we have to remember: if there is anybody who has not taken vaccine, infection with only milder Omicron variant is unlikely to protect them against these variants per se. But we must remember that even if, let's say, the hybrid immunity with Omicron and the vaccine that we had taken is likely to be protective for earlier variants, we must remember that variants tend to replace every time, they tend to predominate, but they never go back to the earlier variants that we had observed in the past. And the picture is very much clear that currently, even in UK, BA 4.5, 4 and 5 are increasing dramatically, and it is expected that these will be the major ones that are likely to affect in a short period of time. Now, what is important thing that we must remember, that with each new predominant variant that comes in any sublineage, the rate of spread increases significantly, that is transmission efficiency. The protection against severe disease, hospitalization and death, that continues to persist. It is better than reduction that you actually require from getting the infection. We don't know the contribution of vaccine alone, vaccine plus past infection with COVID, but we know that the immunity due to vaccine as well as infection ends after 6 to 9 months. What are the implications for us? We are protected for some more months. We should not wait for another episode of infection to augment our immunity. It is better to take booster dose in time. A small investment of time to get these boosters will protect your life from COVID-related hospitalizations and deaths for next 9 to 12 months for sure. One needs to take booster dose. Please remember that COVID is a multisystemic disease. Post-COVID syndrome, where the symptoms tend to persist among 4% of people, is something which we don't understand much. We do not understand what would be the organ damage and its long-term impact just because of COVID, whether it was asymptomatic or mild. There is a common notion that people have that vaccines don't protect against acquiring infection, and therefore I won't take vaccine. No, but it is not going to be really useful. But that is incorrect. We must remember vaccines protect more efficiently against hospitalization and death, but we must also remember that they continue to protect even against infection, but not that efficiency that one would look at. Now, what is also important for us to remember that since we don't know much about post-COVID syndrome, since we don't know the long-term impact on the organs which were infected during an episode of COVID infection in an individual, what is equally important for us to remember? We need to take vaccines and continue to adhere to COVID-appropriate behavior to prevent new infection from getting in, any new variant that comes in, at least in the at-risk close setting where you need to protect yourself. Should we wait for a vaccine that uses Omicron as against Wuhan virus that currently all these vaccines have in its production? We should not. We must remember that Moderna, one of those US manufacturers, has developed one vaccine against using BA1 variant, but it is now now findings are coming out of late that BA1 infection, uh, those who were infected by BA1, they continue to remain vulnerable to BA.4 or BA.5. Will there be a new variant that will come? Yes, there is always a possibility of it coming. It could lead to a benign, highly transmissible infection, or perhaps it would result in a new strain of coronavirus. Why are we saying this? I'm sorry to show this may be a complicated graph, but this is called as antigenic cartography. What do we mean by that? If it is like it is based on phylogenetics. Phylogenetics is if you see within a family, if there are there are cousins who have come into your house, and you were to say who is closely related to one. No, you can plot, you can look at their features and then know who is perhaps distantly related, even if you were to look physically. But if you look at it genetically, you can perhaps do it far better. Now here, this is a genetic map which is named as C. You look at the other variants that have come so far and look at Omicron. It is a distant relative of earlier variants, which is what does it essentially mean? That this variant is far different than the original virus. So essentially, one issue that tends to come is how did it go so far? Because it has 50 different mutations occurring in such a small space. Now, if that is the case, people started looking for it. And one of the things that happened was in Denmark, there was one report that minks were infected by COVID. And that led to looking at different animal reservoirs as to who could get infection by different COVID variants per se. And when they looked at Omicron, how Omicron could have had emerged, they looked at different animals which may be domesticated, which are in our own house, and they found that the variant that they saw in mouse, the rodents per se, was closer to the Omicron mutations. Now that led to a different concept that, like we say, this COVID virus, SARS-CoV-2, came from bats, infected human beings, and then human beings gave it to rodents. And in rodents, it also started mutating, and then it came back to us again as a different virus like Omicron. Now, one of the things which we also need to understand is in a similar phylogenetic map where genetic distance is being recorded, you find if you look at the different variants of Omicron, BA.1, BA.2, BA.3, you find the rapid rate at which this particular variant is also mutating. And look at the genetic distance between BA.1 and BA.4 or 5, which essentially means it is more likely that the virus is still unstable, it may produce a new variant, and it is also possible that this variant may not belong to SARS-CoV-2 now, which may affect us. Perhaps it could be a new coronavirus that may come. We don't know how virulent it would be. What is the best answer? Best answer now, which people across in the world, there are about 8 different groups that are working on it. Now, they are trying to develop a dream vaccine, which would be against all coronaviruses. So it will be complete coronaviruses like MERS, SARS, you name any, including COVID-19. And let's hope that in next couple of years' time, you would have this dream vaccine available so that the dreams of a child to live in a free world would become a reality in a short span of time. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ramanji. It's a really wonderful and nice lecture over COVID-19 in India, opportunities and challenges. So now, I understand everyone has, have some question in their mind. So, let us start question and answer session.
Yeah.
Sure. So I'm inviting audience, to ask the question by raising the hand. Okay, no one have, I cannot find anyone. Yes, Dr. Subramati, Dr. Goswamiji.
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
Thank you for a very, informative talk. And I had one question, which is that when first COVID came, then we had talked about herd immunity. We were reading about herd immunity. And now with this virus mutating and, people also getting second time, does it make any sense, herd immunity?
Absolutely not. It does not make sense to think about herd immunity when population doesn't remain in the same place. That's number one. And the second issue which we need to remember is when the variant itself keeps on changing, it generates escape mutants. And therefore, every time, let's say when this was with a particular variant called as A, and 60% of the people had already got infection. But by then, if a new variant comes, that is not going to look at those 60%. For him, that variant, they continue to remain vulnerable. So you are starting again from 0% to movement towards 70%. So herd immunity is not a good concept to be adopted in infectious diseases where mutations occur and population admixture is a common challenge.
Can I ask one more question?
Yeah.
Please go ahead.
So, there are many statistical models which are giving lot of predictions, and So I don't know, like, how seriously they should be taken, or
Um, uh, that's a difficult question. I hope most of the models that we have seen in India are called as stochastic models. When you say stochastic, if you actually adjust to your model very frequently, it doesn't remain stochastic modeling. It's like your 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 input is going to be new cases that are reported all the time, and you have also got to remember that your assumptions have to be robust. Yeah, if I choose to use those reported figures which are gross underestimates, yeah, my denominator is going to be different every time when I'm going to choose whatever parameter I want to. So these models have their own challenges. Can 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 we think that we have got hand on a good stochastic model world over? I still don't think so. World over, everybody is struggling. There is nobody who can give an answer as to when what is going to happen or what would be the magnitude, because we are dealing with something which has too many assumptions in place, and those assumptions also, when we try to back up with data, the data is not robust. So your stochastic model is also going to fail more often.
thank you very much again.
The next question is from Dr. Durga Prasad ji. Dr. Durga Prasad ji, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, sir. It was an exciting lecture. So I have two questions. First is about the recent reports of infections. Actually, we see around 12,000 to 15,000 kind of thing, but every other day it drops by 2,000, 3,000. So how do we go about or believe those numbers?
No, you should not believe those numbers. Those numbers are of those people who want to get themselves tested and who seek medical care. Uh, Unfortunately, this is a milder infection, and therefore, people's priorities are more towards livelihood. They don't want to waste their time to go to test and get isolated if they are found as infected. Naturally, your denominator that you are going to see is so twisted that you will not be able to understand anything out of such data. And on top of it, you have home-based testing kits, where reporting is not done because they can do it in their home itself. So those numbers are, there is no point in looking at it in any graphical pattern, whether it is giving me some kind of trend. It's just an indication. And if you ask me, one of the things which I feel why these numbers are increasing, are they abnormal? They are not. Omicron has still not gone. It is just that people don't want to test themselves, so you don't know whether it is there or it is not there. Now, what has happened is this is a time when dengue is increasing. This is a time when other viral infections occur. And when they go for taking care for those infections to doctors, doctors will always prescribe RT-PCR as another test. You can't only look for dengue when it comes to fever, because you have to rule out other infection. And the result is these are accidental detections that are occurring among those who still get themselves tested by RT-PCR. If you talk to different physicians, the patient will tell you, "Acha, I will do all other investigations, but not RT-PCR."
Okay.
वो तो mild है, क्यों करना है? पैसा बर्बाद होगा. I think that is twisting those numbers per se.
Okay. So in continuation, like in one of your slides, you have shown that 90% might have infected with one or the other variant.
Yeah,
So that becomes true.
yeah. That is the
So,
truth.
so my second question, I do not know whether it is related to COVID or not, but recently in last couple of days, we are hearing about disease X. So can you throw some light on that?
No,
It is
disease
reported
X
in
is
UK.
no disease X is like, COVID was disease X when it occurred in China, in 2019. Disease X is an unknown syndrome. You have, until the time you detect an organism to label it, we call it as disease X. And that disease X should have a pandemic potential. That means if it starts spreading, it will spread all across. Then we call it as disease X syndrome. So it is like anything in a black box where we don't understand what it is. You put it as disease X if it has higher transmission efficiency. So people could call any infection as disease X to begin with, but the truth will be known subsequently. COVID was also a disease X in a way at some point in time.
Okay, do we need to bother about that? Because it is in news for last couple of days.
No, there is no reason to bother unnecessarily unless something is known. No? It's like monkeypox. No? Today they speak of monkeypox, 3,000 odd cases occurring world over. Since day one, I kept on putting only one viewpoint, that it doesn't have that pandemic potential. No, it may occur, it doesn't matter, but would it spread across rapidly? I never thought, and I still continue to believe it doesn't. So you would find different diseases will come. No, it is mainly because of climate change. We have to remember that zoonotic diseases will keep on challenging us. No, animals are also living with us. We are also living with animals. The environment is there, and because of climate change, the interface is becoming far more important. No? And the result will be new and newer diseases are bound to come. We have to be prepared to handle all these new diseases that occur. But that doesn't mean we should be scared, because such things don't occur as often. We have to remember common things occur commonly, uncommon things occur uncommonly.
Okay, sir. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.
Sir, now I have one question.
Yeah.
Sir, I mean, this virus undergoes the mutation for us for more than 50 times. And now the vaccine available in the market that contain the same constituents. And now most of the countries across the world, they recommend either the booster or the precautionary dose, I mean, as the same constituent to prevent as a prevention measure. So to what extent it is justified?
No, we have to realize two things. One, as I said, virus mutates as a response to immunologic pressure that comes either from vaccine or natural infection or any medicines that you are using. No? Because they are his enemies. No? It is like, if there is a thief who has been trapped in a particular place and it has to come out. So it could be a police, it could be people who may be standing outside. So when he looks at that crowd, he has to decide what he should change to try and come out of it. That's how mutations tend to occur. Now, when they are going to occur, even if you use one or the other vaccine, what is going to happen? The virus will find a way to infect people. So a vaccine, when you use, let's say, another vaccine which may be good to prevent infection against one particular virus variant, no, even if I replace with another vaccine, you will find that the virus will mutate against it and ensure that it will be able to infect an individual per se. Right? So vaccines, even if we change, may not protect you from getting infection. But when it comes to producing severe COVID disease, it's not entry into the body, but there you're looking at virulence. All vaccines will continue to remain as effective, though some variation might be seen over a period of time. You might also see that vaccines may drop their ability to reduce the risk of hospitalization, severe COVID disease and death. But changing the vaccine may not remain as an effective solution when the virus is still unstable, able to mutate rapidly. So whatever you give, it will produce a variant against it.
Correct, correct. So, I mean, thank you, sir. My second question is, many countries across the world, they have introduced the third dose as a booster dose. While in India, we have named it the precautionary dose. So what is the difference between this booster and precautionary? Why, I mean, we have introduced it as a precautionary dose, not a
No, it
booster
was
dose?
just it was just that we had to take a new name because once you say booster dose, you will suddenly find it would mean that you will have to provide it to everybody who had received 2 dosages. But the differentiator that we had to use was first was 60 plus with chronic morbidity with others. Now we didn't want it to be confused with the booster dose approach that rest of the world was following. They were not prioritizing after second dose. Here there was prioritization. So you change the name and say precautionary dose. That's all.
Correct, sir. So may I invite our director, Dr. Anil Bhardwaj, to ask some question?
Thank you, Dr. Raman, for a very excellent talk and updating us of what's all happened and how we got prepared to handle this kind of huge pandemic on the country. And this is probably the first time we have seen that a vaccine could be developed and administered such a large population in such a short time. So first thing which I was trying to understand is that, you know, the vaccine, we all know development takes a very large amount of time. And but in this case, of course, it was a very different in terms of the people getting affected, that we had to really come out with some short solutions and provide doses to a very large number of populations because so many got infected. So are there going to be some strategic changes now in terms of the test protocols which we have to take to say that vaccine is now safe and it can be given? Because in earlier cases, we have seen that it is more than 5 years, 10 years down the line that vaccine got really, you know, certified in all possible ways that it is safe to be given. Whereas here within, I don't know whether it was 6 months or 9 months kind of thing that we said we can go ahead with this kind of vaccine. So is there a thinking going on to change those kind of protocols?
No, there are lots of things which have changed for good, and there are some which one would be doubtful to call as very scientific things. This is a true answer that I'm trying to give. It's not an easy answer to give politically. But science got twisted. Now, if you actually look at it, one of the things that they had to do was do parallel experimentation. Initially, in all vaccine developments, we used to have a component which we call as preclinical trials in animals. Now, that itself used to take close to about 3.5 years time. Now, what they did cleverly was preclinical and clinical. Both developments were occurring parallelly. What would happen in those circumstances? We are today lucky that there were no major casualties in the same. The vaccines were safe. But it could have been a difficult thing to do when you do it parallelly. But now we know that parallel approaches are feasible in an emergency. And why do I think it was an emergency? Just imagine we are only 2.5 years, just about 2.5 years into this pandemic, and almost all have got infected, even though we produced vaccine in 1 year's time. It tells you that the speed at which this virus was spreading was so rapid that if you do not try to go for such approaches, which perhaps would be, I don't know what to call them. They are not accelerated approaches as well. They are far beyond accelerated approaches that even US FDA had adopted so far. But otherwise, we would develop a vaccine 5 years later, and COVID perhaps may cease to exist. So those challenges were there. Now, what do we need to do? Now that we have learned everything, we need to reflect back. How we can handle such an emergency in a better manner as of now. And I think those learnings will be used for both regulatory approaches in research as well. Even in research, I can tell you, I can share one thing, that when the trial started, you have to just imagine, this is a lockdown period. And who is going to monitor those trials? How those trials are going to be monitored? When people can't move within the country, how they can be implemented per se? How do you even go and ask a patient to come and show just because he has received a particular drug or whatever vaccine at that juncture? Those were very difficult issues. You look at the sero surveys that we did nationally. Now, one of the biggest challenges was, how do you go to somebody's house and ask him for blood sample? Would that person be willing to come out? Because they have been told, no, you have to wear mask, not to mix with people. But these challenges, in terms of research, in terms of ability to conduct trial, in terms of regulatory approvals that occurred, we will have to rethink globally. This is not unique to India. This is a global issue where we will have to reframe as to how we should handle these emergencies, perhaps in a better manner compared to the unprepared state that we were in at that juncture.
Now I can see a very good question from Dr. Bushit Vaishnav in my chat box.
Yeah.
Will there be a requirement for 4 doses of the vaccine? And will it continue like flu shot we take every year?
I don't think it will be required beyond third dose. Now, this is my individual opinion, which I keep on articulating nationally also. I don't think it will be required beyond the third dose. That is the booster. One reason is, now whatever is likely to hit us is unlikely to be from the family of SARS-CoV-2. So it will require a newer approach. But by then, my expectation is in another 2 years' time, you will have pan-coronavirus vaccine. But I cannot talk of timelines so easily at this time point, because you have also got to remember, this is a commercial world. The market size is also important. Now, if you give suddenly a pan-coronavirus vaccine, you will find that the market will be gone. One shot and it will be all over. Now, those kinds of things are also part of the politics of commercial world. So we cannot place that way. But I don't think we will require it beyond booster, because I strongly believe T-cell immunity kicks in. It is always there. It will come out. But T-cell immunity will protect you from development of severe COVID disease and death. But it cannot prevent infection by a virus. That is because, what does that infection do? Infection is like somebody who is wearing a glove and the ball is going to come. He will catch it really well, right? But for infection, I will need those gloves throughout my life. Now that cannot happen. Your antibody titers will wane off, so infection will occur, but the T-cell immunity will protect you against severe COVID disease. And this would essentially mean the infection would become mild and milder, and it will become endemic.
Correct. Now, Dr. Neeraj Rastogi want to ask someone question. Dr. Neeraj Rastogi, please go ahead.
Hello, sir. First of all, thank you so much for the nice talk. And
Yes,
I have a question. Means we have seen multiple waves including Delta, where everybody was so scared that even there is a little cold, so people used to run for antigen or RT-PCR test. And then Omicron came, and then we become too much careless. So is it a right approach not to worry about too much unless things are serious? Don't worry, means let it be like simple cold and cough. Let it come, let it go. Or means we should take it seriously. What is your opinion about it?
No, one thing which we have to remember, we need to take this issue seriously, at least in two populations. I know you are referring to use of mask and such issues. One thing which we have to remember is those who are highly vulnerable, those who are older, those who have chronic morbidity, should continue to follow COVID appropriate behavior in every at-risk situation where they are likely to be exposed, for one simple reason that there is no point in taking chance, even if that is a milder infection, because post-COVID syndrome can be worse. Same is the story with children. That children will have to be protected as much as possible. Though their immune systems are strong, they may not develop severe COVID disease. They may not develop anything. We still don't understand much about post-COVID syndrome and the end organ damages that tend to occur. So that remains as a complex box that we will have to worry about. And that's the reason why you find globally also, they continue to work on children's vaccine even for the younger age groups. Because we don't understand more about it. But as much as possible, all those who are older, they should continue to follow COVID appropriate behavior. Ideally, it could be good if it is followed by all.
Yeah, but as you said, for younger kids, so now the schools are open. Children started going to school, and means in classroom, kids you can't say that you have to keep the mask all the time. They will behave in their own style. So means how to handle this? What is your opinion? Means how to handle?
It's very difficult to suggest anything in this, because in countries like ours, when it comes to children in schools, you can't follow any COVID appropriate behavior, because you look at distances that you are expected to maintain, all the precautions to be followed. This will happen in those international schools where there are 20 students in a class. That is very difficult to comment. But fortunately, children have a very powerful immune system. And therefore they will survive. But the issue is about post-COVID, which we will have to learn over a period of time. And if there is any long-term impact, we should be able to avert it. I'll give you a simple example. Now, one of the learnings of COVID is, COVID infection as a post-COVID syndrome, it manifests into unmasking of diabetes. Now, which essentially means if I had a higher risk of having maturity onset diabetes, that is type 2 diabetes, because my parents had diabetes, everybody in my family has diabetes. So at a given age, perhaps 50, 55, I will get diabetes. Even if I was 45, the diabetes gets unmasked early because of COVID. So we don't know its long-term impact. It's only 2.5 years, please remember, since we understood about the disease and we are struggling to handle it. So avoiding infection as much as possible is the best possible solution. I mentioned children because I think, to me, children have a huge lifespan ahead. So we tend to get worried about them. Let us hope all my worries with respect to children turn out to be useless. But at least for elderly, we need to follow these protocols surely.
Sir, why I specifically asked for children, because in the beginning of monsoon, this cold and cough is very common, normal cold and cough, and means you will never know whether it is normal cold and cough or it is means your kid or is getting infected from someone else or affecting others unless we do the test. And for simple cold and cough, going for test, I don't know, means how.
No, for that at least I can say one thing. It should be parents' responsibility, teachers' responsibility. If a child comes with fever, cough and cold or whatever, they should ask the child to go back to house and not come to the school. Or the child should not, no, somebody who knows he is infected, he should not come to the school. Whether testing that or not testing that is a different issue. Any symptomatic child, this will reduce respiratory burden, respiratory diseases burden dramatically. In India, if you actually look at us, you find that if somebody in the household gets an infection of cough and cold, within next 2 or 3 days, everybody in the household has already got it. I think we need to be responsible. At least wear a mask at that time. At least don't go out and mix with people and spread that infection. I think that responsibility should be with the parents and teachers.
Okay, sir. Thank you.
So I have another question, doctor. Initially, when COVID, happened in India, the isolation period or the quarantine period was kept for 14 days. Now, over the period of the time, it has been reduced to 10 days and 7 days. So, what is the reason behind this?
Now, that depends on incubation period. And what is incubation period? Incubation period is time taken from the entry of the virus within to produce symptom. So for Omicron, for that example, now Omicron has 2 to 5 days period. Now, if the virus has gone in my body, within 2 to 5 days, I might get fever, cough, or whatever manifestations of Omicron are. This 2 to 5 days period is called as incubation period. Now, what we do is, if it is 2 to 5 days, we look at the median or mean. Let's say it is about 3 days, 2.5 days, or whatever. What you do is you multiply that by 2 to ensure that maximum period is covered in that, right? It's more like confidence intervals, but a crude kind of an approach I'm trying to talk about.
Correct.
So you would cover most of the period. So there is always a chance, even if you cover, let's say, 10 days period, somebody may still get it. We don't know, but majority will not get it. So that period kept on reducing because the incubation period of the virus started getting less and lesser with every variant.
Now, last question, I think is a console type of question from Mr. Vinith. How long will it take to going Corona from the world?
Oh, that's,
It's a
as
console
I
kind
said,
of question.
it is not this coronavirus. No, coronavirus is a huge family.
Yeah.
You have MERS, you have SARS-CoV-2, you have SARS. No, so there are multiple viruses. If you have to eradicate coronavirus, the only answer could be an effective pan-corona vaccine. But coronaviruses will otherwise keep on coming in one or the other garb. They could have only new name. So they will still be there.
So thank you, Dr. Ramanji. And now I'm inviting my colleague, Dr. Sheetal Patel, to conclude the session and say a word of thanks.
Thank you, Dr. Raman sir, for very informative session. And you made a very simple presentation for the most controversial topic. As a physician, I know it's very difficult to treat this mischievous virus because of the controversial diagnosis, management, and a complication. But I would like to thank you again as a policy maker. You saved the India with a very low death rate, and thanks for the once again for that. And I would like to thank Dr. Bhardwaj sir, our director, and the team of this Amrut Vyakhyaan who made possible this lecture to be in PRN. And I would like to thank our viewers also who made this session successful. I would like to thank again, sir, for such a wonderful session and understanding this very much disputed topic in a very simple manner. Thank you once again, sir. Thank you all.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so much, Dr. Raman. And
Thank you, sir.
yeah, we are really thankful to you for sparing your time and coming to our this program and enlightening us with a lot of things which we all worry about, in our day-to-day life also, even now.
I know.